It was a quiet morning in the city of Houston, Texas, the kind of quiet that feels almost unsettling. Nothing seemed out of place. The neighborhood was calm, predictable, the kind of place where life moved slowly, where people believed nothing bad could ever happen. But calm can be deceiving, and silence often hides the truth. Evelyn Brooks stepped out onto the sidewalk, adjusting her hoodie as she tied her sneakers. To the world she looked ordinary, a jogger, nothing more. But this wasn't just any woman. This was Judge Evelyn Brooks, a name that carried weight behind the heavy doors of the courtroom, where her decisions shaped lives and demanded justice. But here, in this quiet neighborhood, Evelyn wasn't a judge. She wasn't surrounded by lawyers, bailiffs, or court reporters. She was just Evelyn, out for her morning jog, savoring a rare moment of peace before a day that would test her more than she knew. Evelyn began her usual route down the quiet streets, past empty park benches, her footsteps a steady rhythm against the pavement. This was her sanctuary, her time to reflect. Her mind drifted to the day ahead, another long session presiding over a case that had left a heavy weight on her shoulders. It wasn't just any case, it was about police misconduct and racial profiling, a topic that hit far too close to home for Evelyn. She had pored over witness testimonies, reviewed damning evidence, and prepared herself to deliver a ruling that would force people to look at a truth they often ignored. But Evelyn didn't think about that now. She let the cool morning air fill her lungs, the soft sunlight kiss her skin. For a moment, the world felt right. A few blocks away, Officer Jack Barnes sat slouched in his patrol car, coffee growing cold in the cup holder. Jack had patrolled this neighborhood for years, and in his mind, he knew every street, every face, every car that belonged. He believed it was his job to protect his community, to keep it clean, safe, and predictable. But there was a problem with the way Jack saw the world. If someone didn't fit his picture of who belonged here, suspicion set in. Assumptions turned into judgments, and judgments turned into actions. Jack's eyes narrowed when he spotted Evelyn in the distance, a woman jogging alone, a hoodie pulled over her head, a small gym bag bouncing at her side. She didn't look familiar to him. "Who's that?" he muttered, leaning forward, his instincts already working overtime. To Jack, she wasn't a morning jogger. She wasn't a professional clearing her head. She was suspicious. Someone who didn't belong. Evelyn stopped near a park bench, pausing to stretch her arms and sip from her water bottle. The sound of an engine idling nearby broke through her moment of peace. She glanced briefly over her shoulder, but thought nothing of it. Jack watched her closely, his eyes narrowing as he noticed something flutter to the ground. A receipt. He couldn't see where it was from, but something about it triggered his suspicion. "What's she carrying?" he murmured to himself, his mind already jumping to conclusions. Evelyn turned to continue her jog, oblivious to Jack stepping out of his patrol car, the door slamming shut behind him. "Excuse me, ma'am." Jack's voice rang out, sharp and authoritative. Evelyn stopped, turning calmly to face him. "Yes, officer?" Jack's eyes darted to the small gym bag she carried. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow, surprised but polite. "I'm out for a jog." Jack's gaze dropped to the crumpled receipt on the ground. He picked it up, frowning as he read it. It was from an upscale store. "Where'd you get this?" he demanded, holding up the slip. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. "That's mine," she said simply. "I must have dropped it." Jack's expression hardened. "These are expensive items," he said, his tone laced with doubt. "Mind telling me what's in your bag?" Evelyn's calm demeanor never wavered, but something in Jack's tone sent a chill through her. She knew where this was going. "Officer," she said steadily, "I don't believe I've done anything wrong." Jack stepped closer, his voice sharp. "If you're not hiding anything, then let me see the bag." Evelyn hesitated. She had nothing to hide, but she also knew her rights. "You don't have probable cause," she replied, her voice still calm but firm. Jack's face darkened. To him, her confidence wasn't composure, it was defiance. "Refusing to comply, huh?" he said loudly, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing," Evelyn said firmly. But it didn't matter. Jack had already made up his mind. "Turn around," he snapped. "You're resisting an investigation." Evelyn froze. She had seen moments like this unfold before. Moments where rights were ignored, where assumptions turned into accusations. "Officer," she said quietly, "you're making a mistake." But Jack wasn't listening. He grabbed her arm, pulling out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for suspicion of theft and resisting an officer," he said, loud enough for anyone to hear. The cold metal cuffs snapped around Evelyn's wrists. She didn't resist. She didn't fight. She simply looked him in the eyes and said one thing. "You have no idea what you're doing." As Jack led her toward his patrol car, Evelyn kept her head high, her face calm. Bystanders began to gather, pulling out phones to record what they were seeing. A jogger in handcuffs, an officer barking accusations. But no one, least of all Jack, realized what had just happened. Because the woman he had just arrested was Judge Evelyn Brooks, a federal judge with more power than he could possibly imagine. And Jack's mistake? It wouldn't just ruin his career. It would expose a truth far bigger than him. Are you enjoying the story? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and click on the subscribe button to enjoy more from Living Stories. The silence in the patrol car was suffocating. Judge Evelyn Brooks sat in the back seat, her wrists bound by cold steel cuffs, the weight of injustice pressing down on her shoulders. Outside the window, familiar streets passed in a blur, streets where she had once felt safe. Officer Jack Barnes sat in the driver's seat, his confidence radiating like a storm cloud. In his mind, this was a job well done. He had caught someone suspicious, someone who didn't look like they belonged. He thought he was in control, but his ignorance blinded him to the truth. Evelyn sat still, her calm exterior masking the fury burning deep within. She wasn't just thinking about herself. This was about something bigger. This was about justice. And as they pulled into the station, she knew one thing for certain. Jack Barnes had just made the mistake of his life. Inside the police station, the noise of ringing phones and chatter filled the air. Jack led Evelyn toward the booking desk, his grip on her arm unnecessarily firm, as if trying to prove a point. "What's the charge?" a booking officer asked lazily, not even looking up. Jack smirked, tossing the crumpled receipt onto the desk. "Suspicion of theft and resisting an officer." The officer raised an eyebrow briefly, but said nothing. To him, it was just another routine arrest. But for Evelyn, every step was a reminder of the injustice playing out. "Officer," Evelyn said calmly, her voice cutting through the hum of the room, "I'd like to make my phone call." Jack scoffed loudly, drawing the attention of nearby officers. "Phone call? Not yet," he said smugly. "You'll get one when I say you do." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "I know my rights," she said, her voice firm. "You're required to," Jack interrupted, his tone sharp and condescending. "You're in no position to demand anything. You can sit here as long as I decide. In fact, you might want to get comfortable. You could be in that cell for a long time." The words hung in the air like a threat, laced with malice. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She knew men like Jack. She knew how they thrived on power, on making others feel small. "Suit yourself," Jack muttered, leading her to a small holding room and slamming the door behind her. "Let's see how tough you are after a few hours in there. If you were in Evelyn's shoes, what would you have done when those who enforce the law become its abusers? Tell us in the comments. Stay with us and subscribe as this story unfolds, because the truth is coming, and no one can stop it. Outside the holding room, Jack leaned against the counter, laughing loudly with two other officers. "Another one who thought she could talk her way out of it," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "You should have seen her face when I cuffed her." "What'd she do?" one officer asked, barely interested. Jack smirked, holding up the luxury store receipt. "Suspicious behavior. Couldn't explain how she got this. And the hesitation? That's what really got me." Across the room, Officer Ryan Daniels listened quietly, his unease growing. Daniels wasn't like Jack. He still believed in fairness and looking at the facts before making decisions. Something about this didn't sit right. "Suspicious behavior?" Daniels asked, approaching Jack cautiously. "What exactly did she do that was suspicious?" Jack rolled his eyes. "She had a designer receipt and a gym bag, alone, in a hoodie. Didn't look like she belonged, if you know what I mean." Daniels frowned. "Did she resist?" "She didn't cooperate," Jack said sharply. "Same thing." Daniels didn't respond. Instead, he looked toward the holding room where Evelyn sat, calm, unshaken, her posture straight. She didn't look guilty. She looked prepared. Daniels' gut told him something was off. The holding cell was cold, the walls gray and lifeless. Judge Evelyn Brooks sat on the narrow bench, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She refused to let her composure slip. Not here, not now. Her breath was steady, her gaze focused on the single door in front of her. But even as she sat still, the injustice of it all gnawed at her. A judge, a federal judge, wrongfully arrested, stripped of her dignity, and thrown into a cell without reason. And all because Officer Jack Barnes decided she didn't belong. Outside the cell, Jack paced the narrow hallway, his confidence growing with every step. He had no idea who Evelyn really was. To him, she was just another suspect, another person who dared to challenge him. And Jack Barnes didn't like being challenged. Jack stopped in front of the cell, leaning casually against the bars. His smirk was back, dripping with condescension. "You're awfully quiet in there," he he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the empty hallway. Cat got your tongue? Evelyn didn't respond. She met his gaze with a calm stare, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. Jack's smirk faltered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. I'll tell you one thing, he continued, his tone mocking. You're going to be sitting in that cell for a long time. Nobody's coming for you. Still, Evelyn said nothing. Jack's expression darkened. He didn't like being ignored. To him, silence was disrespect. You think you're better than me? He snapped suddenly, his voice growing sharper. You think you're special? Let me tell you something. You're not. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice soft but cutting through the tension like a blade. Are you finished? Jack's jaw tightened, her calm tone like salt in a wound. He wanted her to yell, to argue, to fight back, but her composure was unnerving. It made him feel small. You should be careful how you talk to me, Jack sneered, his voice low and threatening. I could make things a whole lot worse for you. Evelyn didn't blink. You've already made a mistake you can't undo. Her words hit their mark. Jack's face turned red with anger. He pointed at her through the bars, his voice rising. You're in no position to tell me anything, he shouted. You think you can talk down to me, huh? You think you're some kind of queen? Evelyn's voice remained steady. You should walk away, Officer Barnes. Jack's fists clenched, his breathing heavy. The air in the room felt electric, charged with his anger and her refusal to bend. Jack stepped closer to the bars, his face just inches from Evelyn's. He lowered his voice, his words dripping with malice. You're lucky I even let you sit in there, he hissed. People like you don't get second chances. Evelyn finally stood, her calm presence towering over his anger. She stepped forward, locking eyes with him through the bars. People like me? She repeated, her voice quiet but firm. Is that what you tell yourself to justify your actions? Jack's face contorted with rage. Before he could think, his hand shot forward through the bars, slapping Evelyn across the face. The sound echoed through the empty hallway, sharp and sickening. For a moment, everything froze. Evelyn staggered slightly, her hand moving to her cheek, but she didn't fall. She didn't cry out. Instead, she straightened herself, her gaze locking back onto Jack's. The cold air in the holding cell seemed to thicken, pressing in on Judge Evelyn Brooks like an invisible weight. The sting of Officer Jack Barnes's slap still burned across her cheek, but it wasn't the physical pain that lingered. It was the chilling realization that she was at his mercy. And Jack? He wasn't sorry. He wasn't afraid. If anything, slapping her seemed to fuel his arrogance, giving him a twisted sense of power he was all too eager to wield. Evelyn sat back on the cold bench, her heart pounding softly against her ribs. She was calm on the surface, but deep down, a gnawing fear began to take root. What if no one came for her? What if she was left here, in this cell, with no one to challenge Jack? She had seen how men like him operated, how far they were willing to go when no one was watching. For the first time in years, Judge Evelyn Brooks was afraid. What do you think would happen to Evelyn now in the cell? Would she get rescued from Jack? Or would she remain there without anyone knowing her whereabouts? Outside the cell, Jack Barnes stood tall, his smugness filling the hallway like a foul stench. He glanced back at Evelyn through the bars, his lip curling into a sneer. You think someone's going to come rescue you? He said, his voice dripping with venom. You're wasting your time. People like you don't matter here. Evelyn looked up slowly, meeting his gaze. She didn't respond. There was nothing she could say that would reach a man like him. But her silence seemed to irritate him further. I should have known you'd be trouble the moment I saw you, Jack continued, stepping closer to the bars. That smart mouth of yours won't get you out of this one. You're nobody in here, just another suspect. Evelyn's hands curled into fists on her lap. She kept her breathing steady, but inside, the walls were closing in. Every word Jack spoke chipped away at the thin barrier between her composure and her fear. You're lucky I'm even letting you sit in there quietly, Jack added, his voice low and menacing. Things could be much worse for you. With one final glare, Jack turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. The sound of the heavy door slamming shut made Evelyn flinch. And then, for the first time, the silence terrified her. Evelyn leaned back against the cold wall of the cell, pressing her fingers gently against her bruised cheek. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Her mind raced with thoughts she didn't want to entertain. She had heard the stories before. Stories of people who disappeared in places like this, victims of unchecked power in silent halls. What if no one knew where she was? What if her attorney hadn't been alerted? The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second feeling like an hour. Evelyn swallowed hard, silently wishing for any way, Anyway, to make a phone call. She had people who would come for her, people who would set things right. But Jack had taken away that lifeline. She whispered to herself, her voice trembling just slightly. I need to get out of here. Evelyn closed her eyes, forcing her mind to stay calm. She couldn't let the fear win. But as time dragged on, doubt crept in like shadows. Would anyone realize she was missing in time? What if Jack came back? What if worse things happened? The thought sent chills through her. She was a federal judge, a woman who had always fought for justice, and yet, here she was, locked in a cell, powerless against a man who had the system on his side. And then she heard footsteps. Soft, hesitant footsteps that didn't sound like Jack's. Evelyn's eyes opened, and she sat up straighter, her heart pounding. A young officer appeared at the door, Officer Ryan Daniels. His expression was a mix of unease and guilt as he glanced over his shoulder, checking the hallway before stepping closer to the bars. Ma'am, Daniels whispered, his voice low, Are you okay? Evelyn studied him for a moment. She recognized him from earlier, the officer who had questioned Jack's version of events. Daniels looked young, inexperienced, but something about his eyes told her he still believed in the job for the right reasons. I'll be fine, Evelyn said softly, her voice steady. But I need to make a phone call. Daniels hesitated, his hand twitching nervously at his side. I'm not supposed to, he muttered, trailing off. He glanced toward the hallway again, clearly torn. Please, Evelyn said, her tone gentle but firm. You know this isn't right. Daniels shifted on his feet, his guilt clear as day. If Barnes finds out I helped you, I'm done, he whispered, his voice shaky. If you don't help me, Evelyn replied, her voice low but unwavering, he'll get away with this, and I won't be the last person he does this to. Daniels froze, her words cutting through his uncertainty like a blade. He knew she was right. He knew he couldn't keep looking the other way. With a deep breath, Daniels reached for his keys and unlocked the holding cell door with a soft click. Evelyn stood slowly, her bruised cheek catching the dim light. I'll take you to the phone, Daniels whispered. But you need to be quick. Evelyn nodded, her composure returning as she stepped out of the cell. Thank you, she said quietly. Daniels led her carefully down the hallway, his eyes darting nervously toward every corner. At the end of the hall, he pushed open a door to a small, empty office. The phone's on the desk, Daniels said. I'll keep watch. Evelyn picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed a number she knew by heart. Her attorney's voice came through almost immediately. This is Judge Evelyn Brooks, she said clearly. I need you at the precinct immediately. Bring the case file. The young officer's face went pale. Judge, he mouthed silently. He followed her quickly back to her cell and left the room quickly. The word spread through the station like wildfire. Judge? An officer whispered. Did he just arrest a judge? The chatter grew louder. Jack, still lounging in the break room, didn't yet realize the storm that was gathering. The front doors of the station burst open as a man in a crisp suit strode in, his face set in stone. The room fell silent. This wasn't just any visitor. He carried authority that demanded attention. Where is Judge Evelyn Brooks? He asked firmly, his voice echoing through the station. Nearby officers froze. Whispers erupted. Jack's smirk vanished as he stepped into the room, his confidence cracking. Judge? Jack repeated, his voice weak. The man turned to Jack, his eyes cold and piercing. Are you the officer who arrested her? Jack stammered. She was acting suspicious. Suspicious? The man repeated, cutting him off. You cuffed and detained a federal judge without probable cause. Do you have any idea what you've done? Jack opened his mouth, but no words came out. Around the room, other officers exchanged glances, the reality of the situation sinking in. The attorney turned to the chief, who had appeared at the commotion. I want Judge Brooks released immediately. The chief's face darkened as he turned toward Jack. In my office. Now. Jack's world began to crumble. The cracks were spreading, and there was no way to stop them. Evelyn Brooks walked out of the holding room, her head high, her calm composure never wavering. Jack watched her go, his face pale, his arrogance shattered. What he thought was a simple arrest had spiraled into something far bigger, a mistake that would cost him everything. But this wasn't just about Jack. This was about a system that allowed officers like him to act unchecked. And Evelyn Brooks was about to make sure the world saw it. Because she wasn't just a victim. She was a judge, a fighter, and now the key to exposing the truth. Stay tuned and subscribe because the real story is only just beginning. The station was no longer calm. Whispers spread like wildfire, carried on the sharp edge of disbelief. Officers glanced nervously at one another, murmurs of Judge Evelyn Brooks filling the air like smoke. Jack Barnes, the once confident officer, now stood frozen, realizing the weight of his actions for the first time. But this wasn't just about his arrogance or ignorance. This was about something much bigger. It was about the abuse of power, about racial profiling, about a broken system where the truth was often ignored, until now. And Judge Evelyn Brooks, she wasn't done yet. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning of her fight, a fight that Jack Barnes had unknowingly handed her on a silver platter. The chief of police stormed into his office, his face like thunder. Officer Jack Barnes followed closely behind, his confidence hanging by a thread. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the station like a warning. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" the chief barked, pointing a finger at Jack. "You arrested a federal judge, without cause, without evidence, and without a shred of common sense," Jack stammered, trying to defend himself. "She was acting suspicious, sir. She hesitated. She refused to cooperate." The chief's eyes narrowed, his voice dangerously calm. "Suspicious? Acting suspicious because she dropped a receipt while jogging in her own neighborhood? Because she hesitated?" Jack swallowed hard, his bravado slipping. I didn't know she was a judge," he muttered weakly. "And that's exactly the problem," the chief shot back. "You didn't know. You didn't ask. You just assumed." The chief turned, his voice rising. "Do you know how this makes us look? Do you know how quickly this is spreading? There's already footage online of her in handcuffs, and when people find out she's a judge, this department is going to be ripped apart." Jack's face paled as the chief continued. "You're suspended pending investigation. And if I find out this wasn't just a mistake, if I find out this was racially motivated, you're done here. Do you understand me?" Jack nodded, his words failing him. For the first time, the consequences of his actions were becoming clear. What do you think would happen to Jack now? Will he lose his job, or will his career be destroyed? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to enjoy more of these stories. Meanwhile, Judge Evelyn Brooks sat across from her attorney in a quiet office at the station. Her hands rested calmly on the table, her posture straight. She had faced pressure before. She had ruled on cases that made headlines and changed lives. But this was personal. The attorney flipped open a thick file and set it on the table. Evelyn glanced at it briefly and nodded. "We're taking this public," the attorney said firmly. "The way they treated you, the way they denied you your rights, it's unacceptable. And it's not the first time it's happened." Evelyn's voice was calm but resolute. "It's not about me," she said softly. "It's about the system that allows this to happen to so many others. Today it was me. Tomorrow it could be someone who doesn't have the resources to fight back." The attorney nodded, pulling out a small recorder. Evelyn's voice filled the room as the device replayed the conversation she'd recorded during her encounter with Jack. His accusations, his dismissiveness, his threats. "You think this is enough?" the attorney asked. Evelyn's expression was unwavering. "It's a start." Outside the station, the world was already watching. News outlets picked up the story, social media exploded with outrage, and the footage of Evelyn in handcuffs became the spark that lit a fire. "Federal judge arrested without cause," one headline read. "Racial profiling in plain sight," said another. Clips of the arrest circulated online, paired with Evelyn's calm voice on the recording. People were angry. Angry that someone like Evelyn, a woman of power and respect, could be treated this way. But they were angrier knowing it wasn't unique. It was a reflection of something deeper, something darker. Protests erupted in the community. People held signs demanding justice, chanting in front of the precinct where Jack had worked for years. And in that crowd, something unexpected happened. Officer Ryan Daniels, the younger cop who had doubted Jack from the start, stepped forward. "What happened to Judge Brooks was wrong," he told the gathered reporters. "And it's time we take a hard look at ourselves, at how we police, and at the biases that exist in our system." His words went viral. People called him brave. Others called him a traitor. But Daniels didn't care. He had seen the truth, and he couldn't unsee it. As public pressure mounted, the department launched an internal investigation into Jack Barnes. It didn't take long for the cracks to appear. Old complaints resurfaced. Complaints of racial profiling, excessive force, and unwarranted arrests. Names and stories emerged, each one a painful echo of what Evelyn had endured. "He pulled me over for no reason," one man said. "He accused me of theft because I looked suspicious," a woman added. The patterns were undeniable. Jack's career, once filled with pride, was now unraveling thread by thread. Days later, Evelyn stood before a packed room at a town hall meeting. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and the community sat silently, waiting to hear her speak. Evelyn's voice was steady, her words carrying the weight of truth. What happened to me should never have happened, she began. But it does. It happens to people in this country every day. People who look like me. People whose voices go unheard. She paused, scanning the room. I was lucky. I knew my rights. I had resources. But what about those who don't? How many others have been silenced by fear, by shame, or by a system that fails to protect them? The room was still, her words settling in like stones. This isn't just about one officer, she continued. It's about a culture. A culture that teaches some to judge and others to fear. That culture must change, and it starts here, with us. Applause erupted from the crowd. Evelyn's story had become more than a single incident. It had become a call to action, a demand for accountability. Jack Barnes thought he could silence her. He thought his assumptions in power would go unchallenged. But what he didn't realize was that Evelyn Brooks wasn't just a judge. She was a fighter. And his actions? They were the very proof she needed to expose a broken system. The fallout was far from over. The investigation had begun. The protests had started, and the fight for change, that was only just beginning. Stay with us as this story continues, and subscribe for justice, because the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always rise to the surface. Officer Jack Barnes thought he had already faced the worst of it. The suspension, the public shame, and the growing investigation into his past. But the truth is never predictable, and the mistakes he had tried so hard to bury, they were about to resurface in a way no one saw coming. What Jack didn't know, what no one knew, was that Judge Evelyn Brooks had been preparing for something far bigger. And this fight? It was about to take a turn no one expected. Inside the police station, the tension was palpable. Investigators combed through Jack Barnes' case files, uncovering patterns that could no longer be ignored. Complaint after complaint painted a disturbing picture. Racial profiling, false arrests, and the quiet suffering of victims who had been dismissed for too long. But then, something unexpected happened. An investigator stumbled upon a sealed file, one that had been buried deep in the system. A file Jack had hoped no one would ever find. It was tied to an incident from 2 years ago, an incident very similar to Evelyn's arrest. What is this? The investigator muttered, pulling out the old records. A name jumped out at them. Isaac Taylor, a young black man who had been arrested under suspicious circumstances. The investigator's heart sank as they flipped through the file. There were gaps in the paperwork, inconsistencies in Jack's report, and most damning of all, a missing body cam recording, one that Jack claimed had malfunctioned. The investigator picked up the phone immediately. Get Judge Brooks on the line, they said. She needs to see this. At her office, Evelyn sat with her attorney, reviewing the growing mountain of evidence against Jack Barnes. The complaints were enough to ruin him, but the sealed file? That was something more. When the investigator handed her the documents, Evelyn's expression shifted, calm, yet piercing. Who is Isaac Taylor? Her attorney asked quietly. Evelyn exhaled, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. 2 years ago, I heard about this case, she said. It was buried. The young man never got justice. Jack claimed the arrest was justified, but there were gaps, questions no one wanted to ask. The pieces were starting to come together. Evelyn's voice hardened as she spoke. Jack Barnes didn't just profile me. He's been doing this for years. Isaac Taylor's case might be the proof we need to show it's systemic. The attorney nodded. What do you want to do? Evelyn closed the file, her voice steady. Bring Isaac in. It's time to give him a voice. The next day, reporters gathered in front of the courthouse, cameras flashing as Judge Evelyn Brooks stepped up to the podium. The crowd hushed, anticipation filling the air. You all know my story, Evelyn began, her voice carrying across the steps. But this isn't just about me. This is about a pattern, a system that has failed for far too long. She paused, then motioned to the side. From the crowd, a young man stepped forward. Isaac Taylor, now in his early 20s, his face serious and determined. Gasps rippled through the crowd. 2 years ago, Isaac Taylor was arrested by Officer Jack Barnes under nearly identical circumstances, Evelyn said firmly. The body cam footage was conveniently lost, and Isaac was left without justice. But today, we're here to change that. The reporters erupted into questions as Isaac spoke for the first time, his voice shaking but strong. I was just walking home when he stopped me, Isaac said. He accused me of stealing, said I looked suspicious. I didn't do anything wrong, but that didn't matter to him. I thought no one would believe me. I thought I was alone. Evelyn's voice cut through the noise. Isaac wasn't alone. None of us are. And Jack Barnes is about to answer for everything he's done. As the press conference ended, Evelyn's attorney approached her, his face unreadable. Judge Brooks, he said quietly, there's something else. Someone just came forward. Evelyn frowned. Who? The attorney handed her a slip of paper. A retired officer. He worked with Jack Barnes years ago. He says he has proof. Hours later, Evelyn sat across from the retired officer, a man in his 60s with tired eyes and a burden he had carried for too long. Jack Barnes has been getting away with this for years, the man said, his voice heavy with guilt. I covered for him. I saw what he did to people like Isaac, like you. But I kept quiet. I shouldn't have. Evelyn leaned forward. What kind of proof do you have? The man pulled out a dusty USB drive and set it on the table. I kept copies of old body cam footage, he admitted. Footage that Jack thought he erased. Evelyn stared at the drive, her heart pounding. This was it, the missing piece, the proof they needed to expose everything. Back at the police station, Jack Barnes was summoned to a hearing, his arrogance replaced by visible fear. The room was packed. Reporters, community leaders, and officers waiting to see the outcome. Evelyn sat at the front, her presence commanding. The USB drive had been reviewed, its contents damning. Video after video showed Jack harassing innocent people, black men and women, falsely accusing them, threatening them, and laughing as he got away with it. When the footage played on the screen, the room fell silent. Jack's voice echoed through the speakers. People like you don't belong here. You think you're smarter than me? No one's gonna believe you. Jack buried his face in his hands as gasps filled the room. There was no denying it now. His pattern of abuse, his bias, his lies, all of it was on full display. The chief of police stood, his voice firm. Officer Jack Barnes, you are hereby terminated from the force, effective immediately. Your actions have disgraced this department and violated the trust of the community. Jack looked around, desperate for support, but found none. Even the officers who had once defended him turned away. Evelyn rose to her feet, her voice carrying through the room like thunder. This isn't just about one man, she said. It's about a system that has allowed men like him to operate unchecked. But today, we're sending a message. Justice cannot be silenced. Not anymore. The fight was long. The truth was buried. But in the end, justice won. Jack Barnes thought his power would protect him. Instead, it destroyed him. For Evelyn Brooks, this wasn't just personal. It was a turning point. A moment that exposed the cracks in a broken system and demanded change. The USB drive? It sparked reforms across the city. Policies were rewritten, officers were retrained, and Jack Barnes? His name became a warning, a reminder of what happens when power is abused. But for Evelyn, this was just one step. Because the fight for justice never ends. And as she walked out of the courthouse, her head held high, the world knew one thing for certain. The truth always comes to light. Stay with us, like and subscribe because justice may have been served, but the story isn't over yet. The walls of the courthouse seemed to hold their breath. Reporters crowded the steps. Protesters gathered outside, their voices echoing off the marble pillars. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Every bench filled, every pair of eyes watching. At the center of it all stood Judge Evelyn Brooks, calm, composed, and unshaken. Today was not about revenge. It wasn't about one officer's fall. Today was about justice. Justice for every voice that had been silenced. Justice for a system that had been ignored for far too long. And for Officer Jack Barnes, this was the moment where everything he had buried would rise to the surface. Because Evelyn Brooks didn't just survive his abuse of power, she turned it into the evidence that would hold him accountable once and for all. Jack Barnes sat at the defense table, his head low, his confidence stripped away. The man who once acted untouchable now looked small, almost invisible under the weight of what he'd done. Across the aisle, Evelyn Brooks sat with her team, her presence commanding the room without a word. All rise, the bailiff's voice echoed. The judge entered, not Evelyn, but one of her peers, a respected figure in the justice system. The irony was clear. The very institution Jack had abused was now the one that would judge him. The prosecution wasted no time. This case, the lawyer began, his voice sharp and direct, is about a pattern of abuse, racial profiling, and power unchecked. Officer Jack Barnes was not just a bad apple, he was a symptom of a system that allowed this behavior to thrive. The evidence began to roll out, piece by piece. One by one, the pieces of Jack's downfall were laid bare for the world to see. First, there was the USB drive, the retired officer's hidden recordings. Body cam footage that Jack thought was erased played on a screen at the front of the courtroom. The room fell silent as his voice rang out, sharp and damning. You people don't belong here. You look guilty to me. Who's going to believe you over me? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jack's lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. The footage showed the truth, raw and undeniable. Then came Isaac Taylor, the young man from 2 years ago. He took the stand, his voice steady despite the weight of his story. "I was walking home when Officer Barnes stopped me," Isaac said, his eyes locked on Jack. "I didn't do anything wrong, but he wouldn't listen. He accused me of stealing. When I tried to explain, he arrested me anyway." The prosecutor held up a file. "And this is the report Officer Barnes filed that day, full of gaps and false claims." Jack squirmed in his seat, his face pale. He had no defense for this. Finally, Evelyn took the stand. The courtroom held its breath as she began to speak. "The day Officer Barnes arrested me, I saw firsthand the consequences of unchecked power," she said. "I knew I had done nothing wrong, but that didn't matter to him. It wasn't about the truth. It was about control." Her voice hardened, carrying across the room. "This is not just about me. This is about a system that has allowed people like Officer Barnes to abuse their power without accountability. That ends today." With the evidence stacked against him, Jack Barnes finally took the stand. His lawyer had coached him well: stick to the script, show remorse, paint it as a misunderstanding. But under the weight of Evelyn's testimony, Jack began to crack. "You said Judge Brooks hesitated," the prosecutor said, his voice calm but relentless. "Why did you see that as suspicious?" Jack fumbled for words. She didn't answer my questions right away." "Or maybe," the prosecutor pressed, "you saw a black woman in a hoodie and made assumptions. Isn't that right, Officer Barnes?" Jack's face flushed. "No, that's not true." The prosecutor held up the body cam footage. "This says otherwise. Your words, your actions, they tell the real story." Jack's voice faltered. He looked around the courtroom, desperate for support, but found only cold stares and shaking heads. His arrogance had been stripped away, leaving nothing but a man exposed by his own actions. The jury deliberated for hours. The crowd outside the courthouse grew larger, their chants for justice echoing through the streets. Finally, the doors opened and the jury filed in. The judge's voice broke the silence. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The foreman stood, clearing his throat. "We find the defendant, Jack Barnes, guilty of misconduct, abuse of power, and falsifying reports." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to write headlines. Jack's face fell, his career and reputation shattered beyond repair. But for Evelyn, this moment wasn't about Jack. It was about what came next. Outside, standing before a sea of cameras and protesters, Evelyn addressed the crowd. "This verdict is a victory," she said, her voice carrying over the noise. "But it is not the end. Jack Barnes is one man, but the system that allowed him to thrive must be held accountable. We need reforms, we need accountability, and we need to demand better." The crowd erupted into cheers, her words a spark that lit a fire for change. In the months that followed, Evelyn's case sparked a wave of reforms. Body cams became mandatory across the state. Policies were rewritten to ensure accountability. Officers underwent training on racial bias and de-escalation. Evelyn worked with community leaders, law enforcement, and local governments to ensure change wasn't just promised, it was delivered. As for Jack Barnes, his name became a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when power is abused and the truth ignored. But for Evelyn, the fight was far from over. One evening, she stood in the park where her arrest had taken place. Children played on the grass, families picnicked in the shade. It was peaceful, different. A reminder that change, while slow, was possible. A young girl approached Evelyn, her eyes wide with admiration. "Are you the judge from the news?" she asked. Evelyn smiled gently. "Yes, I am." The girl grinned. "I want to be like you someday." Evelyn knelt, her voice soft but strong. "You can be, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl ran back to her family, leaving Evelyn to watch the sunset, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks, because justice had been served. Change had begun. And Evelyn Brooks, she wasn't done fighting for a better world. This wasn't just a story about one officer or one arrest. It was about the power of truth, the resilience of those who fight for justice, and the courage to demand better. Because when power is abused, silence is not an option. And as Judge Evelyn Brooks proved, the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always comes to light. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Living Stories for more powerful tales of justice, resilience, and change. Together, we can make a difference, one story at a time.